Good afternoon. I'm Matt Weintraub, Bucks County District Attorney. I'm here to speak about the jury's verdict and the sentence. And then I'll also speak about our decision to not seek the death penalty after all. The jury's verdict first. The defendant got found guilty of the first-degree murder of Dean Finicaro and for killing Mark Sturgis and Tom Mayo. He was not charged with Jimmy Patrick's murder. The judge's sentence, the way I interpret it, accurately and justly, is the defendant will spend the rest of his life behind bars in a cell. And not only that, but he's also held criminally responsible for his role in Tom and Mark's deaths. And that's the reason for the consecutive sentences, which were certainly warranted in this case. He will die in prison. And there were many factors that I and we all are proud to stand with each and every one of these men and women, discussed, pondered, prayed over, agonized over, debated, that went into our decision to ultimately grant the defendant life as opposed to asking the jury to sentence him to death. We met with all the families as we have for the past 2.5 years, all the way back to July of 2017. These families are our families, and I don't just mean our Bucks County families, I mean our families, because we have lived through this criminal saga together. Their input is important, certainly, but this decision is mine. Here's the irony. The easy thing for us to have done, for me to have decided, would have been the jury's already impaneled, they've already found first-degree murder, they are ripe for their sentencing, let it go forward. That's the irony. That would have been easy to allow their sentencing to go forward as planned. But easy doesn't always equal right. So in part of the analysis in this jury's verdict, one of the things that we considered was interpreting what that verdict meant. And in this instance, there was one count of guilty, or one guilty verdict of first-degree murder for Dean's murder, and 2 counts which could have come back as guilty of first-degree murder, but instead were to voluntary manslaughter. So to speak legally for a moment, that means that we had one aggravator to pursue. We spoke with the families at length. And I will not tell you that everybody was unanimous in their wishes and their beliefs as to how to proceed. But there was certainly consensus. And after an emotional consultation with the families of these 4 boys, frankly, because we included Jimmy Patrick's grandparents in this discussion, we ultimately then met with the Finicaros, Anthony and Bonnie and young Anthony. Because Dean's murder is the only one for which the death penalty was left as an option. I am in awe of the Finicaros' grace under extreme duress, which frankly is the complete opposite of the defendants, who had his character tested, and frankly we have few, if any, opportunities to have our character tested in life. And it's how we stand when our character is truly tested that indicates how we will be judged forever as a person and by the rest of humanity. He was an utter and miserable failure. as has been now said so many times, has been argued by Gregg and by Kate, the defendant had so many opportunities, not only to extricate himself from this awful, heinous, diabolical plan to snuff the life of 3 boys he didn't even know. He could have saved them. And he chose to think only of himself. Anthony Finicaro, to give credit where it's due, said it best. He said that if we do this, if we grant the defendant his life by our grace, he doesn't get to win. Not one thing. We've heard him, the defendant, on the prison calls, if we listen to them, saying, I hope I get the death penalty because then I'll get the federal defenders and then I'll be notorious and people will know who I am and I'll go in a blaze of glory and I'll never be put to death anyway, etc., etc. And now, he doesn't get to be notorious. He will forever remain anonymous. He will not be a political martyr for the death penalty argument. He will not become a political football. He will not become a cause celeb. He will go down in history as an afterthought. He was offered 59.5 years and he turned it down. He can't claim even one victory by convincing a jury to spare him his life because we decided to do that. We don't do this for him. We do this for us. We do this for the Finicaros, for the Mayos, for the Sturgises, for the Patricks. This is the right thing to do in this case. Each person in each family that you've now heard pour their hearts out in court has had to relive this every day of this trial and every day of their life for 700 to 800 days. Since July of 2017. Can you imagine that? I can't. It's death by 1,000 cuts. But what this means, by ending the case in this way on our terms, these brave men and women who are arrayed behind me who sacrificed every part of their essence on that Solebury farm, is that we never have to utter the defendant's name, never have to see him again. That is what the families gain by this result today. This criminal saga is over. I don't know what's normal for these families now. I can't possibly imagine. I've never suffered through the murderous loss of a loved one. But by their amazing grace, these brave families have one less cross to bear. And I just hope that they can begin to heal. I'm sure that you have many, many questions, and I'd like you to understand that none of this would have been possible without the extreme dedication of all the men and women that are arrayed here. I wanted to take a special occasion to thank Gregg and Kate Kohler, Dave Kemmerer, Jonathan Koretsky, Marty McDonough, for their undying loyalty and adherence to the truth and to seek justice in this case. And today, finally, justice is done. I'll take some questions, and I'd like to offer you also an opportunity to speak to Gregg and to Kate if you wish.
I just want to make sure. So the Finicaros were in support of the decision not to seek the death sentence for him?
That is correct. Yeah.
Sturgis and Mayo, were they in support of the no death?
don't want to speak for them directly because the way that the jury's verdict came down, their son's death was not implicated in this sentencing any longer.
But would they, understandably, I understand that, but did they ask you to seek death for the Finicaro killing?
I will say this, there was a consensus that this was the way to go, and I think that you saw in the victim impact statements that they are prepared to move on with their lives and have this defendant not be inextricably linked with their boys' memories for 1 second longer. Anybody else?
The defense attorney says that he plans to appeal this decision. Does that surprise you at all?
No, it doesn't surprise me. But rather than be a cause celeb, this will be an appeal just like any other. The defendant will now join one of hundreds, if not thousands, who are seeking their right to appeal in anonymity.
In those prison phone calls that you mentioned, what was the context of that? Were those statements that he made to his family? Were they preparing for this trial? Was this sort of the attitude that he had going into this?
This was in preparation for the trial and even after he understood that we were going to determine his fate. We took that opportunity away from him.
Can we hear from Kate?
Sure.
Good morning. Did you wish you had the opportunity to get Mr. Donato on the stand, and what would you have asked him?
Well, I was ready for him, and I believe that that was one of the reasons he chose to exercise his right to remain silent. I would have. I'm sorry, did you ask if I wanted to cross Mr. DiNardo or
Well,
Mr. Kratz?
I've asked Donato, but I'm going to ask you about Kratz.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
But so
I thought-
Donato, I mean, would you like the chance to put him up and talk to him and get him to say what was going on here?
No, we don't. We've dealt with Mr. DiNardo at a prior proceeding. His case is over, and we don't deal with we would not choose to deal with Mr. DiNardo again.
Kratz, how about
Kratz?
him?
Again, I was ready for him if he did take the stand. However, he chose not to, and that is his right.
Your
Ready?
conversations with the families, and without getting into detail, it's just their emotional state now that this has kind of reached a conclusion.
Yeah. Well, as you've witnessed, I'm sure if you were in the courtroom, the raw emotion that they continue to show and the sheer strength that they show despite their emotions and feelings in this case are empowering, and I hope that they are able to move on. I do believe that this is the first step in that process of closure for them, and I hope that they do have that opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add, I mean, this was a unique case from a law enforcement perspective. The grace that has been shown by the families throughout the process has been grace and courage and resilience, frankly, that has allowed all of us to do our jobs in the way that we have over the last 2.5 years. And also I'd like to thank the jury. The jury, as we sat through this process, it was very clear, had a emotional effect, having seen what they saw in the courtroom, just the same way that we as prosecutors and law enforcement as detectives and police officers had an emotional effect based upon what we saw. The jury went through a lot. They were very careful in their deliberations, and through their deliberations, they gave what we believe to be a just result. And they've given us time from their lives, and they are the backbone of the criminal justice system, so we thank them for that.
How important was that videotape, that confession videotape, and did you think Kratz was completely nuts to attempt a jury trial when he knew that tape was out there and it was coming in?
Well, everybody has a right to a jury trial, and he exercised his right, which is a right that we respect in our office. As far as what was said on the tape, it was clear he was inconsistent between the tapes, and we are satisfied based upon what came out through the tape that we know at least part of the truth. The evidence that we had corroborated parts of the statement, and we are very satisfied with the responsibility that the jury gave us for the murder of Dean and the killings of both Tom and Mark.
Isn't it remarkable to have an admission on tape in the way that he said it when he described raising the gun and shooting Finicaro in the head?
It's what our detectives do.
And to that point, I think that's a great segue. We wouldn't have the incredible fortune to stand here and say that this case is closed and concluded with two men serving the rest of their lives behind bars without the incredible dedication of all of the officers you not only see here who are representative of law enforcement, but federal, state, local, county law enforcement, whole communities came together to make sure that we could bring Dean, Jimmy, Tom, and Mark home to their families. For that, I will forever be grateful. I hope that I'm never in that situation again, but it's heartening to know that if we are called upon in a situation of crisis, we'll answer the call and we'll make sure that justice is done and our boys come home. Thank you all.
Can I ask one more? Or have you ruled out the idea that you would charge Mrs. DiNardo for not more carefully handling that 357 that the understanding was hers?
I think this case is over. I've not looked at the statute of limitations in a while, but it is even possible, frankly, that the statute of limitations has run. We're not looking at the little picture at this point. We've looked at the big picture, and the case is concluded. Thank you all.